Good morning, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to meet with us today for our webinar. As we all know, structural integrity and building and resident safety is a very trending topic, and it's a focal point in our industry today, not only at the federal level, but at the state level too, as we'll discuss this afternoon. As our communities continue to age, more and more community stakeholders are going to be challenged with maintaining their infrastructure and dealing with the challenges associated with that. Thankfully, there's many professional service industries available to help you as association stakeholders to navigate these challenges. So joining us today, we have Amita Hamadi and Kyle Hunter of Lerch Bates and Andrew Stoltenberg of Reserve Advisors to discuss reserve studies and engineering services that'll help you navigate these challenges. Before we get started, I do want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. Today's presentation will be recorded. So later today, we'll be sending out an email to everybody that registered with a copy of the recording, as well as a copy of the slide deck. Additionally, we do anticipate a large attendance today. So there is a Q&A function within the Zoom webinar. We ask that you drop your questions there. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation to go over these questions in greater detail and answer those for you. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Kyle.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Kyle Hunter of Lerch Bates, and I'll be going over the agenda right quick. So we're initially just going to go over each respective firm overview, take a look at reserve studies, as well as the types of structural and building failures that we see, go over some case studies, and look into what warning signs to be on the lookout for, discuss when and how to respond, what may be cosmetic versus what may be something that's definitely worth looking into further. And then, of course, we will have some time for Q&A at the end, as Matt mentioned. So as an introduction to myself, again, Kyle Hunter of Lerch Bates. I started my career in the architecture, engineering, construction industry back in 2013, primarily working in human resources and various functions, but was very interested in the AEC industry, continued working in that industry for quite some time before moving into the building enclosure consulting side of things, working with different consultants. I've been with Lerch Bates, formerly Pie Consulting and Engineering. Some of you may be familiar with that name. We were acquired back in 2020, about the time that I started on with the company. Operated under the Pie name for about a year before going ahead and adopting the full branding and new logo and everything of our parent company, Lerch Bates. My role here at Lerch Bates is business development function. So working with our existing clients, maintaining existing client relationships, developing new client relationships, and helping clients to identify issues that they have, and aligning on scope of services for what we do, and budgets, so scope and fee alignment. And then when the time is right, making the appropriate introduction and handoff to one of our technical experts, such as Amita Hamadi, who we've got here today. So throughout this presentation, as we're going through our slides, photos of different deficiencies, anything that you see, if anything resonates with you, if you see a photo that you think that looks like my building, or anything that is of concern, you have additional questions, or we can help you, feel free to take down my email address, or Amita's on the next slide, and we would be more than happy to discuss with you further, and see if there's a opportunity for us to help you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amita to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, I'm Amita Hamadi. I'm an architect by profession, and have been practicing since 2004. I'm also a lead accredited professional. I started my career in the design field. Was doing multifamily, mixed use, hospitals, commercial building, and then came into the rehab side of the business. I've been with Pie Consulting and Engineering for almost 4.5 years, and now, of course, we call ourselves Lerch Bates. But I thoroughly enjoy doing the rehab side. It's like opening a Pandora's box, not knowing what to expect. But we do take care of we start from the condition assessments, then go on to the destructive test openings, design, bid phase, quality QA, CA, the whole gamut that our clients like to see. And we work very closely with our clients on all the aspects of the rehab side of the business. And I'm going to hand it off to Andrew.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Stoutenberg with Reserve Advisors. First, I just want to say thanks for taking the time out of your day to sit here and listen to us talk about Reserve Studies and Engineering Services. I know most of you are probably board volunteers, and so I appreciate your dedication to doing everything you can to maintain your structures and properties. Just real quick background on me. I do know we have a lot of folks from Florida. That's actually where I am initially from. I went to UCF, Central Florida over there, worked in our Tampa office for a number of years, and now I'm out in our West area in Austin, Texas, and been doing this since 2013. So again, happy that you're here and look forward to talking a little bit about reserve studies and hopefully answering some questions at the end.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Just as a brief firm overview of Lerch Bates and the services that we offer, we are a multidisciplinary consulting firm, nationwide multidisciplinary consulting firm. And what that includes is vertical transportation, elevators, escalators, facade access. How do you maintain the exterior of a building that's 20 stories high? How do you access those windows for maintenance, repair, cleaning, things like that? And logistics, the movement of people and materials throughout a building. And specifically today, what we'll be speaking to primarily is the enclosure structures and forensics division of our firm, which is what me and Amita specialize in here. And what that includes is facade assessments, structural assessments, roof assessments, and asset management. So full building and envelope assessment, consultation, and design services, as well as property condition assessments and field performance testing. So we serve clients on the new construction as well as the rehab side, and primarily what we'll focus on today is existing structures. And with that, I know we've got a pretty broad, widespread audience today. This is just a map of our locations, our national presence. We are headquartered out of Colorado, and Amita and I do sit here in the Texas office. And we have had a somewhat recent expansion into the South Carolina area, as well as Florida with the acquisition of Hawk Engineering. In addition to some other local presence that we actually already had down there. So these are the areas that we currently sit, and with this we're able to support our clients really nationwide, regardless of location. So
yeah, and regarding Reserve Advisors, it's actually a lot simpler because we do one thing pretty much, and one thing only, and that's reserve studies. And so similar to Lerch Bates, we are have a national presence, which is great because it helps us understand local markets and have engineers located in your backyard, hopefully, or darn close to it. But since we just focus on reserve studies, that's why we thought today bringing in Lerch Bates to sort of talk about bridging that gap, sort of what maybe comes next if you've already gotten a reserve study. And so with that, on the next slide, I'm going to be a little bit briefer today. I can be long-winded at times, so I'm going to try to save as much time for Amita here. And I'm just going to quickly cover, or pseudo-quickly cover, reserve studies and just a couple facets about those, which then should sort of lend itself to what Amita will talk about. So if you go to the next slide, what I want to just, there may be some folks on this call who barely even understand what a reserve study is. A lot of you probably have a decent to a good understanding of it. So at the core, when we say a reserve study, it's a long-range capital planning tool, all right? And what it is it's an evaluation of all of your common assets. And it's a 30-year forecast of when the predictable and likely significant repair or replacement of that asset is going to occur. So there's a few things to think about here. There's probably more than a few, but I'm going to just talk about a few. So one is we're looking at that predictable aspect. And so what do I mean by that is we come to a structure, has an asphalt shingle roof. Based on, before you even get to that property, you have a preconceived idea. An engineer has that knowledge, our company has a knowledge of about how long that should last based on normal wear and tear and degradation. And then with that engineer on site, they're going to evaluate that current condition and possibly have to adjust somewhat, accelerate that replacement or defer that replacement. But it's always going to be based on a visual, non-invasive inspection, right? So it's not peeling back any layers. If we're thinking of facade, so if it's stucco, if it's EIFS, if it's a sided building, whatever it is, a reserve study inspection is going to the property and visually inspecting with non-destructive methods and putting a remaining lifespan on, again, either the capital repairs, so maybe painting of that facade or the complete replacement of, say, a roof. And so it's that inspection or that physical evaluation, which is the one part of the reserve study, and mapping out those expenditures. And that gets married with that financial analysis, because at the end of the day, when an association, when a board member like yourself receives a reserve study, what is it telling you? It's telling you a few things, but one of the biggest takeaways is how much do we put away in reserves on that annual basis? So when the time comes for these predictable and likely projects, we have the right money on hand. And so I mentioned it's 30 years long. And whenever I issue a study and I'm talking with the board, I always make this parallel to, you got to view it as a 30,000 foot view document, meaning, it's directional guidance. It's sending you in that right trajectory so that if that roof has to be replaced a few years early, you're probably going to be okay. You likely have most, if not all, the cash on hand anyway, so that would be all right. And certainly if, it gets a few more years of life, then everybody's happy. And that's the level of detail that you're going to see in a reserve study. If you go to the next slide, I just put an excerpt in here of, and you're not going to be able to read it, it's really small. But this is the meat of the reserve study where, again, going back to what I said, predictable expenditure. So when do we need to do roof replacements? When do we need to do repairs to our concrete balconies? And even other things that, are less critical, such as renovating a clubhouse or pool house or replacing a playground equipment. Again, a reserve study is covering all your common assets, big and small. Somebody like Mita and her team, they're not going to come to your property and probably be too concerned about that playground structure, right? Or when you need to put new gym equipment in. But as a board running your association, all those assets do matter to some extent. And that's the goal of that reserve study. And then on the next slide, I just put in some pictures from a reserve study. So this is just an excerpt from the document. And it's a coincidental one because there's going to be some photos later of this same building once these outer layers were taken off. And what I mean by that is this was a visual non-invasive inspection of a property that identified some evidence of possible water infiltration. But again, that reserve study, we're not peeling anything back. We're making all of our recommendations on what we can visibly see. So in this case, we certainly said you need to do some near-term work to the wood trim elements. You need to do some work to the facades. But as some pictures later on from the Lerch Bates team will show, once further investigation occurred and was warranted, a whole host of new issues were discovered. And so that's sort of where I want to bridge that gap, is that reserve study is never, not from us, not from any company, is ever going to be able to identify these hidden underlying defects, latent defects, or just deterioration that is beyond the surface. And that type of deterioration can be wildly damaging, which Amita has a lot more history and experience to probably speak at length to that. And so that's where you want to view this reserve study as that first step, that budgetary step, right? That 30,000 foot view that's sending you in the right direction. But when you have a reserve study, if it's identifying some potentially concerning things, that's where you now need to shift over and look into engineering services, right? And so that's where I'll pass it over. Oh, I think I have one more slide. I'm so sorry. But that's what Amit is going to talk at length about this morning, of sort of that next phase of engineering services and what exactly that is, what they're looking for, and things of that nature. final point that I just wanted to mention here, we sort of presumed we could get some questions on this. So more and more legislation is getting passed. The most significant one would be in Florida, SB 4D. Very high level in a nutshell, this has required what's called a structural integrity reserve study. It's something we have some resources on. If there are some Q&As, we can try to dabble on it, but we're not going to want to talk, for an hour just on that. But that's a pretty big change from a legislation standpoint that's affecting the reserve study and engineering services industry. And you see some additional legislation in Illinois. Maryland just passed another pretty strong one about reserve studies being required every 5 years. Virginia already had some statutory language, and they've just established a new task force. The reason I want to point this out is we are seeing a somewhat or rather quick acceleration of legislation around this this concept. All of this is revolving around trying to make sure boards and associations are maintaining their properties, because what we're finding is these are huge assets. When damage runs out of control and it's hidden, and then we try to rectify it, the cost can be sometimes insurmountable. And so legislators are trying to put some checks in place, and we do expect to see more and more as time goes on. So with that, now I'm happy to pass it over to Kyle and Amita, and they're going to talk more about this, engineering services side, this much more invasive, in-depth side of services that you may need at some point at your community.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, going back, to finding out and exploring our failures in buildings, this is just a slide on, how big is this risk, right? I mean, this is a 2007 study, it's an old study, but it says, out of 17,000 construction defect claims, 69% are from moisture-related defects. And, moisture-related defects just don't stop there, especially if it's a wood construction. The moisture then goes into the structural aspect. And now we just don't have the facade, but also the structural elements that are compromised. So that's where, talking about opening a Pandora's box, right? What you see on the surface, maybe just the, scratching of the surface, there could be much more damage that we could see, once we start exploring the surface. In North America itself, we spend about $9 billion annually in just repairs and litigation. And this is only, again, from moisture intrusion. There are a lot of failures that could damage our buildings. It could be design deficiencies. This depends on, this goes back to our design professionals, the architects, the structural engineers, the civil engineers, where the actual design could, have some faults. The second is the construction deficiencies, and this includes where the installation is not done correctly, and mainly it may be the contractors not having the right workforce to construct as per the design, design documents. Catastrophic events, now that's something that's not in our hands. It could be hurricanes, it could be, tornadoes. That's something, like I said, it happens, but we need to go and, address it. Now, lack of maintenance is, I think, that's something that's in our control. And like we always say, stitch in time saves 9. Early and often maintenance of your buildings, could help you save millions of dollars in terms of maintenance. And long-term deterioration, again, I always look at buildings like machines, right? We take care of our cars the same way we need to take care of our buildings as well. When it comes to sealants, when it comes to waterproofing elements, etc. It does deteriorate with time because of the UV exposure, with movement, lateral movement, etc., the soil movement. It is inevitable. But again, us being on top of the game and making sure that buildings are safe is all that matters at the end of the day. Here again is another image. Now, what Andrew does is visual assessments, right? When it comes to engineering services, we actually do destructive test openings, and that helps us kind of come up with a scope on our design documents. And again, when we do our destructive test openings, my team normally targets the worst effect. Areas could be fenestrations, can be penetrations on the building, at balconies, etc., where we historically have seen, water infiltration. So on this slide here, you see, we have a Juliet balcony and a balcony, and at the corner, I'm sorry, at the corner right here, you see water infiltration, and we have now removed a little piece of the stucco. And on the third slide, you see the actual structural systems that have been damaged. Now, water is really destructive for wood construction because wood absorbs water pretty quickly, and then it transports the water, through a path of least resistance into the structural wooden structures. So that could be detrimental to our wood construction buildings. Now, here I'm going, onto concrete and a little bit of steel. Water, concrete is a porous material, and once the water finds its way into our rebars, our structural systems, it's a battle lost, and that's the reason why any kind of signs on your concrete structure, your foundations, that you see that you have falling, that's the time to start taking action. Again, on the right side, you have metal handrails, guardrails at balconies. Now, it was on this slide, you see the guardrails were not installed properly, and the weeps at the bottom of the guardrails were blocked. Now, what happens is, any structure is designed for it to absorb water and weep out the water through the system. But if the weeps are blocked, you see now the rust causing, and this becomes important because it's a guardrail at a balcony. If this fails, we have, catastrophic events where, we could lose life. So, but these are the initial signs that I would want everyone to kind of, keep your eyes and ears open when you walk your properties. And most important, keep a log. I mean, make sure, first month you see something, how far in maybe 6 months down the line has it deteriorated? Does it need, do you all need to call engineers to have a look at it and take action? I think that this visual science is the first thing for you all to kind of keep an eye on. Now, this can be, like I mentioned about long-term deterioration. On the right side, we have a shingle roof. I mean, you can walk your roof, see any kind of, hail damage, anything that you'll think that has caused, has compromised your roofing structure, something to keep in mind. Now, if on the left-hand side, we have a balcony, very few limited visual signs. You go into it and the entire structure collapses because of the water damage that has caused, that has compromised the structural systems. And your life expectancy can be shortened because of these adverse conditions. And especially when you all are on, the coastline because of the continuous high humidity and moisture levels. Something to look into. Not just the wood structures, but also the concrete and the reinforced concrete structures. I always tell my clients, your warning signs, and like Andrew mentioned, it's always the visual signs that are going to be the first, red flags on structural systems. Spoiled concrete and spoiled concrete, corrosion to steel. Also, sponginess and bounciness when you walk across a surface. This will mainly be on wood construction. Bulges in retaining walls, or even stucco walls, ephes walls, and clogged weep holes. You literally can see these on stone and brick construction. And any penetrations, you have your vent system around the vents. You see water signs. You need to kind of take a good look at it and make sure that you have someone on your team who can take care of it.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here too, Amita. And
sure, definitely, Andrew.
This is a great slide because, as she points out, this is all still visual, right? And so these are things that absolutely one of our engineers doing a reserve study is looking for. What's important for you as a board member to understand is what a reserve specialist conducting a reserve study isn't doing is a comprehensive assessment of every piece of that asset. So for example, spalled concrete, you may have 100 balconies on your building. a reserve specialist isn't doing a balcony survey, whereas we're going to every single balcony and try and find any spalled concrete or any cracks across every single one of those. Or when we're walking your flat roof, we're not doing thermal imaging, we're not walking every square foot of it. But if we come across evidence of water infiltration at penetrations, if we walk over some sponginess in the deck, hey, there's probably water under the membrane, that's a concern. Those are those indicators that, one, are going to help us predict to the best of our ability when you should replace that asset. But secondly, if the frequency of what we're seeing from our limited inspection is severe enough, that's where we're going to likely say, hey, you need to look into this further. And then to Amita's points, that's where their professionals can come in and do a lot more detailed investigation of any of these warning signs.
Absolutely. And when we come in, we visual aspect is one, the first step, like Andrew mentioned, but we actually go and do DTs, destructive test openings. We are now opening the Pandora's box and to see the extent of damage, not just on the surface, but also the structural system. And it's surprising, but when we go and have our drawings done and actually start demoing and start the construction of on the rehab site, there are many, many more aspects that come out that we may not have anticipated, and that's because of the extent of damage that has reached way far inside of the building that we hadn't anticipated when we were doing our DTs, that's destructive test openings. So that's the reason why I keep mentioning about opening of the systems, and surprises are always there. And that's why when we get into any construction aspects, we always have a contingency because of the surprises. I call them the known unknowns on my buildings. So here are a few more warning signs, cracks in the brick, and this could be because of the differential settlement in the foundation. Like I said, buildings are always moving. It's a machine, if I can call it, because of the lateral, the wind loads, the heaving and contracting of the soil, the loading, and because we have dead loads, live loads on a building that cause movement, constant movement in your building. But these are one of the warning signs. You have your facade cracking, and then we can come in and find out why it's happening. And once we know the cause, with our destructive test openings, we can address them and take care of those faults. Here again is a wood construction. You have failed sealants, or just the weather resistive barrier not being implemented or installed correctly. And then because of the constant movement here, you have the building failing, and now the water has intruded into the building. Just one small intrusion, or the water is going to find its way all the way through the structure in wood construction. And here again, a small failure in the siding has caused the wood to be exposed, and water now is gone all the way. And on the left hand side, the column has, at some point, during maintenance, right, of your team, and with due respect, you have these penetrations. Water is going to be entering. It's not being sealed. So all these penetrations are small ways for water to enter into your building. And this is something that, under the soffit of your balcony, we could hardly see any signs. There were signs, of water intrusion. And once we opened it, the entire deck and the joists were deteriorated. And so, your visual signs may be just an opening into, a vast area of damage on buildings. So something to look into.
And I'll jump in again here, because personally, I've conducted reserve studies where, to the point you just made, Amita, let me back up too, to make sure everyone understands. When she said soffit, you wouldn't see this structure here. When you go to this balcony, you would look up, it would look like a painted ceiling, right? So that's what she means, like, we wouldn't know what's going on. And so I've conducted reserve studies where, to Amita's point, very little, you see a little bit, hey, it looks like there may be some water, little spot of water damage. And sometimes that's all it is, right? It can just be, you look, a little bit of water, not a big deal. But then there's been other times where that's what I saw. I returned about 3 years later to do an update to the reserve study. They had investigated, and it looks almost identical to this. They pulled back layers. They saw the extent of damages, and what they needed to spend was leaps and bounds above anything we would have forecast. Because again, we didn't peel any layers back, so we didn't know definitively how severe it is. So to her point, when you see water, evidence of water infiltration, even the smallest, it's something to start to take seriously. You don't have to sound the alarm instantly, but you want to look into it to some extent.
Absolutely. And earlier we start, taking care of our buildings, the better it is. Again, this was, the same balcony, and you can see the Simpson ties. Now it's a structural failure here, where the joists have, peeled away from the beams, and that's where we say, earlier, just do the smallest visual sign that you have. Let's say have a look at it. We'll save a lot of money in the end. And this is the bottom side of the steel stairs. You see these kind of, this is very common in the steel stairs because they're exposed to the weather. You see some signs like this, please get engineers on board and let them have a look at it before a catastrophic event could happen on your structures. And warning signs are always there, on buildings. Water is the signs, water marks, etc. Right? Don't let it go off and put it off for another year or two. It's the urgency is right now. And also, we could always take care of our buildings with Band-Aid, or what I call Band-Aid fixes, right? Where you just put sealants and get done with it. Do not put this lipstick on your structures. Let's investigate a little more and take care of it the way it needs to be done properly. And do not ignore small problems, because they will eventually grow into bigger problems.
Yeah, and Amita, I think you said it really nicely just a minute ago and I'm going to rephrase it, but the cost to investigate something early, when you look at the risk of letting it run and run and run, it is so much a drop in the bucket. You just investigate and either find out it's not a big deal and move on, as opposed to ignoring it for years and years and years and having a tens or hundreds or $1 million problem. And then I think additionally, we can think of like a specific example of maybe a roofing system. And this could be at a townhome type property, 20, 30 buildings, sloped asphalt shingle roofs, regular inspection of those. Why that's going to, cost an association something, the regular inspection by a professional, fixing these small things to your point and fixing them, not band-aiding them, but fixing them typically should really help these associations be able to achieve a longer life. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, it'll save you all a lot of money. I mean, it could be just, when you see a watermark right on your facade, if you can take care of it right now, your structural system will still be, in a great shape, and we don't have to now fix those. Just take care of the stucco and out. Save you tons of money in the future. And maintain the property, grading, your landscape, your irrigation. We don't need to irrigate if you have planters, elevated planters. We don't need to be irrigating those plants year round. Have sensors, moisture sensors. Only when the plants need water, let the irrigation system start. That'll help you with your roof systems if they are elevated. Building enclosure. Let's do it right now. Let's take care of it when you identify when it's small, when it's urgent, rather than waiting for years to come and pushing it down the hill. So, and also when you have any kind of leaks, let's document it, because the historic information helps our teams kind of to investigate on why and how the building or the water intrusion is occurring. And we always have short-term repairs, long-term repairs, and let us help you identify those and help you maintain your buildings.
Yeah, and if I can also add, that concept of good documentation, historical documentation, that's going to be very, very helpful for both Amita and her team and us and someone conducting a reserve study. Because if we go back to, the reserve study and engineering services in some ways have a lot of similarities, but also have huge differences. And if we go back to what I started with, the reserve study, we're trying to give you financial guidance to plan for the future and not have special assessments and not get surprised. And so a big part of that is, well, what's the history of repairs? How many in a year? How significant have they been? Because all of that's going to provide context and color to when we're estimating when those major projects should occur, so you have that cash on hand. So that history is so helpful so you as boards work with your professional management companies. That type of information absolutely outstanding for both our side as well as Amita and her team in terms of when they're investigating a more severe issue.
Absolutely. And also, Lerch Bates takes care of construction defect, especially in Texas. And, we have something called statute of limitations. If you are within the statute of limitations and you all want to go and take care of it, with the builder, or we are always there to help you on the litigation side as well.
Andrew, Amita, Kyle, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you all of the attendees for taking the time out of your schedule to meet. We greatly appreciate it and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.